You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. You don't want to miss today's broadcast, ladies and gentlemen. If you have school-aged children, and if you know anybody who has school-aged children who are not listening, you want to call them on the telephone right now. Tell them to tune in to 101.1 FM Eager in the Round Valley of Arizona. And wherever you're at in the rest of the world, tune in to 9.955 megahertz worldwide shortwave radio. And eventually we will have this broadcast featured on one of our Real Audio websites on the Internet. If you would if you have Internet access and you'd like to check out our web pages, where you could literally spend weeks, and that's no exaggeration, ladies and gentlemen, go to http://harvest-trust.org. That's harvest-trust.org. If you want to put in the www, you can, but you don't need it. Tonight's broadcast is entitled The New School Masters. And folks, if you love your children, make sure that you hear every word of this broadcast.
Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and the warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've exported your jobs and surrendered our arms. They want it. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. The Illuminati wants you to be a slave from birth to grave. The banksters own the Federal Reserve. It's private. They own it. It's neither federal nor a reserve. The cashiers make that fiat funny money stuff you call dollars for 2 pennies. They lend it back to us at full face value, then charge you interest. You get the debt, they get the interest. They get the gold, you get the cash. They want it. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. It is a big idea. It is a big idea. A new world order.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the New World Order. This is the age of deception. In case you, for some reason, weren't aware of that. And you need to open your eyes. And if you are ignorant on some subjects, by golly, you had better get the information you need to be able to make yourself well educated in those subjects. What is it, ladies and gentlemen, that the United States Department of Education the Marxist Socialist National Education Association, which is a teachers union, and big business want to do with your children. You see, the Clintons are leading a quiet revelation for those of us who are watching, and a revolution for those who are not, and it will catch up with you very quickly in public education. Its thrust, ladies and gentlemen, is the transformation from the school's traditional role as the servant of individual pupils and parents to become the servant of industry and the state. Just as in totalitarian countries, students such as these are to have their career paths and curriculum increasingly directed by this shadowy alliance, a shadowy alliance that most of you don't know anything about. Some things have been happening in your schools that you're not quite sure what it means. And I think today we're going to part the curtain and let you take a look. If you've got teachers in your school who are members of the National Education Association, I would advise you strongly, as strong as I can possibly impress upon you, to get those teachers out of your schools. And you'll find out why. You certainly will. Theodore Chen in communist China said, quote, "The primary concern of education is not the acquisition of knowledge, but the remolding of behavior, attitudes, emotions, and thoughts," end quote. When I told you, folks, over the years that there's a new world order coming, that there's a world government that's being formed, I wasn't just whistling Dixie, so to speak. I was telling you the truth. It's going to be Marxist socialist. So you'd better pay attention to what they've done in communist China, what they've done in Cuba, what they did in the old Soviet Union, because those things will be repeated here. You can shake your head if you want to and talk about the fall of the evil empire, but if you have studied it like I have, you know that that whole thing is a deception. Read the book written by Gorbachev. He says it right in there. Read Golitsyn, who was a high-ranking Soviet general who defected to the United States many years ago, warned us that it was going to happen and that it would be a deception to disarm the West. In their joint effort, putting people first, Bill Clinton and Al Gore wrote that the United States should, quote, "create a national examination system to measure our students' and schools' progress in meeting the national standards," end quote. The most important education initiative of the Clinton administration, ladies and gentlemen, has been Goals 2000, which is based upon 8 national education goals. The first of which demands that by the year 2000, all children in America will start school ready to learn. But how can the federal government be sure that all children will start school ready to learn unless there's massive government intervention in preschool home life? And what about my children who are homeschooled? National Education Goal number 3 sets forth that all students will be involved in activities that demonstrate community service. While voluntary service is to be commended, forced child labor by the government makes students the new indentured servants. And so it's not voluntary at all. They cannot graduate unless they do it. And the work is dictated to them. As in all things, socialists stay true to form. They are habitual chronic liars. For an excellent description, folks, of the problems with Goals 2000, get Kathy Finnegan's book called Goals 2000, Restructuring Our Schools, Restructuring Society. And you can order it through Hearthstone Publishing Company. Now, please do this. Okay, I don't know how much it costs. I have nothing to do with this book. I'm not selling you a book. What I'm trying to do is educate you about what's happening in your public schools. Get this book. It's called Goals 2000, Restructuring Our Schools, Restructuring Society, by Kathy Finnegan. It's published by Hearthstone Publishing Company, and you can call this number to get the book. It's 1-800-580-2604. That's 1-800-580-2604. I'm going to tell you again, I get nothing from this book. They don't even know I'm doing this. I just happen to know that this is the book you need to read. Now, concerning the first of the national education goals, that all children will start school ready to learn, the only way the federal government could be assured that this would occur would be to have increasing intervention in the lives of children at younger ages. But how could the feds justify early intervention in family life? Because that's what it's going to take. The chosen tactic, ladies and gentlemen, seem to be the new findings of brain research suggesting the need to avoid irreversible and detrimental changes in the brain's organization before the age of 3. An indication of how that research might be applied to push the Goals 2000 agenda was forthcoming at the National Education Goals Panel meeting held last year in 1997. The minutes from the NEGP meeting mention, and I quote, national content and performance standards, end quote. And Dr. Sharon Kagan talks about early childhood, quote, social and emotional development, end quote, needs, about how some child care workers were not credentialed, and about the need for, quote, an early care and education system, end quote. At that same meeting, actor Rob Reiner, a screaming, raving socialist, active in the Carnegie Corporation-backed early childhood public engagement campaign, stated, quote, there is a nexus between what happens at 0 to 3 and what happens in terms of crime, teen pregnancy, drug abuse, child abuse, end quote. And Dr. Bruce Perry added that if children didn't have certain positive experiences at that time, when the brain is organized, the results could be, quote, irreversible, end quote. So he advocated establishing an early childhood education system. And you can bet it will not be conducted by the parents. Note especially the word take, as Dr. Perry explains that, quote, in Florida, for example, they take crack babies right after birth and give them a whole variety of enrichment sensory experiences. But if you don't do that, you can also put them at further risk of being parented by someone who has really disinvested. You're doubly doomed, end quote. The government can protect its kids is the slogan. Now let me say this again for you. Listen very closely to this. Quote, the government can protect its kids, end quote. Not your children, not the children of the parents. Listen to this again. Quote, the government can protect its kids, end quote. Words have meaning, and you had better pay attention to what the government says. Dr. Perry then recommended the engulfing of impaired family systems into larger, healthier systems. I don't now want to sound like a communist or anything, he said, but you know we have to think creatively about this. Direct quote. In fact, I'll go back and give you the quote. Quote, engulfing of impaired family systems into larger, healthier systems. I don't now want to sound like a communist or anything, but you know we have to think creatively about this, end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, a communist is exactly what he is. Former Food and Drug Administration Commissioner David Kessler commented on NBC Nightly News on August the 23rd, 1996, that, quote, the government can protect its kids, end quote. If the social engineers really believe children belong to government, why would they stop at crack parents? Perhaps they would next decide to take the children of fundamentalists who believe in corporal punishment, which social engineers seek to outlaw. Or someone who belongs to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or devout Catholics, or the children of those people who actively belong to the militia, or just parents whom they decide don't have the proper education or ability to raise their children, and by whose standards and who would make those decisions. And how would you feel when they come to take your children away? Now, don't think this can't happen, ladies and gentlemen. It's already happening all across the country. Psychologist John Rosamond has cited Professor Richard Wexler's Wounded Innocence, in which Wexler discussed child-saver zealots who desire an expansion of government power. Rosamond commented, quote, "Implicit to all this liberal scheming is the belief, firmly held by many mental health professionals, that families are closed, pathological systems that must, in the best interest of the helpless child prisoners within, be made subject to state scrutiny, reorganization, and management," end quote. For an informative summary, folks, of how social engineers have been maneuvering to gain greater and greater control of children at earlier ages, read Peggy Shannon Jones Cuddy's booklet entitled, "Is Your Family Safe from the Graspers?" published by Pro Family Forum. You can get that book from 941-644-6218. That's 941-644-6218. Revealing one of their possible strategies, Colorado's Governor Roy Romer, speaking at the NEGP meeting, said this, quote, "The ideal system would be to, in every community or county, you have an organizational structure that is responsible for the 0 to 3 age level for the child. So the scheme would be pour the money in, admit that you can't fund it entirely from the public side, and then say to the committee, that's it for you to do. And then finally put in a hooker and say, hey, you don't get any payments from state on their highways until you do this job," end quote. You see how it works? You think you're getting something for nothing from the federal government? You pay, ladies and gentlemen, you pay in spades. And those of you out there who have any sense, you know that. Those of you sitting around waiting for the government to give you something for free haven't yet connected with reality. You're living in fantasy land. You're inside the gates of Disneyland, and the park is closed. Didn't you notice the rides aren't spinning around? The government has absolutely nothing that doesn't first come from you. Finally, Romer bemoaned the fact that, quote, "the American public has this ethic of local control," end quote. Seeming to support national education standards in a national test, Governor John Engler of Michigan commented, quote, "I think we ought to take NAEP, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, essentially across the nation to embed it in our state-level testing, because I see that testing is the benchmarking. And even though there is a local control ethic that Governor Romer just mentioned, it does seem to be that if we're doing the benchmarking right, we're going to pull everybody along," end quote. Governor Romer added, quote, "This country needs an institution that it can use to organize all the changes it needs, and I think the best crack at the institution, quite frankly, is Achieve," end quote. Now, for those of you who don't know it, Achieve is a non-governmental effort to measure and report each state's annual progress in assessment tools and accountability systems within 2 years. It was an outgrowth of the National Education Summit last March 1996, where business leaders committed to take into consideration the quality of each state's educational standards when making business location or expansion decisions. The 6 chief executive officers, known as CEOs, who were on the planning committee for the National Education Summit were all members of the Business Roundtable. 4 of the 6 are on the Roundtable's Policy Committee, and the 6 CEOs who were members of the Roundtable and on the Summit's Planning Committee became members of the Board of Directors of Achieve. One of the CEOs on Achieve's board is the head of Boeing Aircraft Company. This is relevant, ladies and gentlemen, because there are discussions that an expanded National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP, will become the new national test that President Clinton has in mind. And most NAEP data is held on a mainframe computer at Boeing Computer Systems, with the rest residing at the National Institutes of Health. Since the tests have student IDs, there is a micro record available to the National Computer System, the Montana State Attorney General, and others who have automatic access to the NAEP. Now, this organization, responsible for the questions asked on the NAEP, is the National Assessment Governing Board, which is appointed by the United States Secretary of Education. And some of the questions deal with attitudes, such as a reading question that asks students whether a person in a short story was deceptive or wise, or clever and practical, or greedy. What such a question will do, according to B.K. Eakman in Educating for the New World Order, is, quote, to indicate which values local parents are transmitting to their youngsters, and therefore what attitudes the community holds as a whole. Combined with other attitudinal passages and responses, which are interspersed among valid reading comprehension items, this question will help analysts to do a profile of the community. Such a profile, in turn, will help behaviorists craft an approach to, quote, planned change, end quote, that will be suited to this community, end quote. Let me read that quote to you properly, because I did it wrong. To indicate which values local parents are transmitting to their youngsters, and therefore what attitudes the community holds as a whole, combined with other attitudinal passages and responses, which are interspersed among valid reading comprehension items, this question will help analysts do a profile of the community. Such a profile, in turn, will help behaviorists craft an approach to planned change that will be suited to this community, end quote. See how they can spy on you through your children and you don't even know what's happening? Speaking last before the chairman concluded the NEGP meeting, United States Secretary of Education Richard Riley stated, quote, I don't think we should have different levels of standards for children in America, end quote, and advocated not only national but international standards. Finally, in the United States Department of Education's Community Update, March 1997, one finds this troubling oxymoron, quote, the new voluntary national tests would be taken by all students in participating districts, end quote. Another one of those socialist lies. The new voluntary national tests would be taken by all students in participating districts, meaning it's not voluntary at all. In President Clinton's February the 4th, 1997 State of the Union speech, he called for national education standards and said, quote, every state and school must shape the curriculum to reflect these standards, end quote. In that regard, he indicated the federal government would assist in the development of national tests in reading at the 4th grade level and in math at the 8th grade level. Anyone knowledgeable about education knows that standards and tests drive what's in curricula. Therefore, if the federal government causes to be developed a national criterion reference test, it will result in a national curriculum. You can count on it. You can take it to the bank. You can say William Cooper told you so. This, in effect, was admitted by Clinton's Deputy Education Secretary Marshall Smith in the Wall Street Journal dated February the 6th, 1997, when he said, quote, "For students to do well in the national test, curriculum and instruction would have to change," end quote. You all wonder how I know things. I receive mountains of information here every day, every single day. And I go through it, and I analyze it, and I put it together, and then I can look at the big picture and see what's happening. When questions about the national standards arose in 1994, Ernest Boyer, the president of the Carnegie Foundation of the Advancement of Teaching and former U.S. Commissioner of Education under President Carter, explained the successful, quote, "stealth," end quote, strategy of the national standards movement. Stealth means sneak up on you, lie to you, implement it without your knowledge or permission. Here's what he said, quote, "If I had ever whispered national standards, I think I would have lost my job. We bent over backwards 15 years ago so that no one would think we were interfering. Within a decade, we have gone from this preoccupation of local control to national standards. There is no turning back," end quote. That's from the New York Times, March 30th, 1994, in case you want to check it. And I always advise you, you know it, listen to everyone, read everything, believe absolutely nothing unless you can prove it in your own research. That's why I give you sources and documentation, so that you don't have to take my word for anything. However, folks, the reaction to this, even among some prominent liberals like Kenneth Goodman, past president of the International Reading Association, has been to question national standards. After Ernest Boyer made the statement that I just quoted, Goodman wrote a column in which he pronounced, quote, "I accuse the politicians and technicians of the standards movement of using standards as a cover for a well-orchestrated attempt to centralize power and thus control who will teach, who will learn, what will be taught in the nation's schools, and who will determine the curriculum for schools and for teacher education. The standards movement promises the political power brokers, ladies and gentlemen, that by controlling outcomes, they can control schools, while appearing to support local control. Be very, very careful." That's from Education Week, September 7th, 1994. You see, nothing's hidden. It's all out in the open. You just don't have access to the information like I do. And that's why we have this broadcast. This kind of duplicitous strategy of paying lip service to local control, while actively undermining it, was even admitted to by National Standards advocate Dr. Richard Elmore at a National Education Goals Panel, NEGP, meeting earlier this year. Elmore stated, quote, "Once you start to be able to collect data on individual schools and benchmark performance and content from the state level against state, national, and international standards, you break the traditional grip of the local administrators and boards, whether you want to or not. I mean, you're going to do this saying all along the way we're in favor of local control, etc. The accountability is going to go straight from the state to the school once that starts to happen," end quote. You see how sneaky they are? You see what liars they are? They plan to deceive you, and they do it every day. Ernest Boyer is now deceased. He had been head of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Even cursory research, folks, reveals that various tax-exempt Carnegie entities are heavily involved in today's educational restructuring. For example, the chairman of the National Test Panel developing the national tests to which President Clinton referred is Wilmer Cody, who is also on the governing board of the New Standards Project, a creation of Carnegie's National Center on Education and the Economy. Another member of the National Test Panel is Eddie Davis with the National Education Association, who is also a member of the Carnegie-created National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Among those who are opposing the movement toward national education standards is Congressman William Goodling, who on August 1st, 1997, along with 22 co-sponsors, introduced House Resolution 214. This bill seeks to mandate, quote, that the Department of Education should suspend any and all planning, development, implementation, or administration of any national testing proposal in reading, mathematics, or any other subject area until Congress provides specific, explicit, This bill seeks to mandate, quote, that the Department of Education should suspend any and all planning, development, implementation, or administration of any national testing proposal in reading, mathematics, or any other subject area until Congress provides specific, explicit, statutory authority, end quote. The resolution was offered as an amendment to House Bill 2264, an education appropriations bill. Never mind the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that the federal government does not have the authority granted by the Constitution to mandate that your schools or your school districts do anything whatsoever. You know how they get you to do it? They dangle money in front of your nose, and you think money is the answer. If money is the answer, why is it, ladies and gentlemen, that when our children went to little one-room red schoolhouses in the pioneer days of this country, where the teacher was paid room and board and a very, very small stipend for personal needs, and grades 1 through 8 all sat in the same room and were taught concurrently, why is it that those children knew more, were smarter and better educated than the children who graduate from a modern high school today? Why is it that every one of those children could read on what today would be considered a fourth-year college level? Why is it that every one of those children excelled in mathematics? Why is it that every one of those children knew the true and correct history of this country and of the world? Can any of you answer those questions? Just recently, I attended a meeting at the Round Valley High School, where the teenage Republicans brought in one of our Arizona senators. And during that meeting, when the senator finished his talk, he opened the floor to questions. One of the school faculty, I don't know if it was a teacher or one of the administrative staff in the back, raised his hand, wanted to know when they were going to get more money so that they could raise the standing of the tests of the students of the state of Arizona. Now, I was sitting in the front row and I couldn't see who it was, ladies and gentlemen. But I'll tell you right now, whoever it was had the wrong idea about children and what they learn and how they learn it. In the Round Valley, we have one of the best high school buildings and schools that you can imagine. I mean, it's really beautiful. It's modern. It's up to date with just about anything that you can compare it with. Now, I don't know whether it is on the cutting edge of technology. I don't know if they have a computer so that every student can plug into the Internet. And quite frankly, don't care. Because plugging into the Internet has absolutely nothing to do with whether those students learn what they need to learn to be successful in life. Among those Chester Finn, the former Assistant Secretary of the Department of Education's Office of Educational Research and Improvement, OERI, criticized the Clinton administration's proposed national tests, saying they, quote, will be creatures of the education establishment, end quote. The Weekly Standard, July 21st, 1997. The education establishment, ladies and gentlemen, seems to be in fact, I can tell you it absolutely is, in the business of social engineering and maintaining itself. In other words, creating more and more reasons why more and more agencies of state and federal government should pump money into their pockets. Former head of the National Endowment for the Humanities, Lynn Cheney, in the Wall Street Journal on April 2, 1997, also noted that the National Council of Teachers of English, powerful advocates of the faulty whole language method of reading instruction over phonics, would be, quote, sure to have influence in the development of a reading test, end quote. Whole word reading is a dismal, abject, total, and complete failure. Any child can learn to read when taught with phonics. Many children have great difficulty learning to read when taught with the whole word concept. Similarly, she noted the probable influence of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, NCTM, in developing a math test. The NCTM emphasizes what one might call, quote, whole math, end quote, and has criticized, quote, a long-standing preoccupation with computation and other traditional skills, end quote. Now, if you don't believe that, get with a math teacher and ask if you can just sit in on the class, and you'll be amazed at what you're going to see. Children do not learn today how to do the actual computation or the actual procedures of figuring out a mathematical problem and arriving at the answer. All students in the classrooms that I have attended, and I have attended many of them, use calculators. Not long ago, someone came up. We live up on top of a hill, folks. Someone came up and parked their car and was rooting around in the lot next door. Well, being the curious person that I am and having received many threats because of this broadcast, I went out to see who they were and what they were doing. Well, it turned out that they were innocent enough. They were just there looking over their property. The lot belonged to them. And when he introduced himself, he told me that he was a school teacher down in the Valley of the Sun, down in Phoenix. And so we got into a conversation, and I asked him about the use of calculators in his and other math classes. And he said that he didn't care how a student arrived at the correct answer as long as the student arrived at the correct answer. And I asked him, you mean that you really don't care if a student learns how to actually do the problem versus punching keys in a calculator? He says, no, I don't. That doesn't enter into the equation, was his exact words. I didn't get into any kind of argument or confrontation with him over that because it would have been absolutely futile to do so. And so I'm sure that until he retires, he and many other math teachers are teaching children how to punch keys in a calculator. And if they ever find themselves in a position without a calculator where they have to complete any kind, and it doesn't even have to be a complicated math problem, ladies and gentlemen, they're not going to be able to do it. And I think that's the whole purpose of this kind of stuff in the first place. America is being dumbed down. Dumbed down. To many of us Americans, one of the most strikingly negative features of communist society is the fact that the communist citizen has his or her career chosen at an early age by the state according to its perceived needs. Now, in the 1990s America, the Clinton administration and federal and state legislators are teaming up to foist on American students a system with the potential for a similar draconian, micromanaged society. If these social engineers have their way, free choices in career selection and access to the job market are going to be increasingly restricted according to the whim and dubious wisdom of the state. At an early age, students will be tested, and whatever the state decides their capability or their talents lie, they will be channeled into various occupations. Your child, although he or she may wish to become a medical doctor, may find themselves working in a garage as a mechanic for the rest of their life. To the current controversy over national education standards, the Clinton administration has added a second major education restructuring initiative known as School to Work, or STW. The best way to understand STW and why it has created a national outcry among traditional educators and parents is to examine its background. Plank 10 of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto provides for a, quote, combination of education with industrial production, end quote. In 1948, a United States House of Representatives committee published 100 Things You Should Know About Communism and Education, which describes what the masterminds of communism have planned for your child in the name of education. He will be trained but not educated. He will be taught to solve problems that are handed to him. People are trained when they learn how to do a particular thing well and can be depended upon to do it, end quote. The next year, 1949, the communists took control of China. And regarding the years 1950 to 1960, Stuart Fraser compiled and edited Chinese Communist education records of the first decade, in which one finds, quote, education must be combined with productive labor, end quote, by Lu Ting-yi, who stated, and I quote, now this combination of schooling with productive labor has given rise to the campaign to reform school curricula and the efforts to change school systems. Our education is socialist education. Education must serve politics, must be combined with productive labor. The purpose of the training is unified, that is, to train socialist-minded, educated workers, end quote. Theodore Chin, in Communist China, 1949-1969, explained, quote, the primary concern of education is not the acquisition of knowledge, but the remolding of behavior, attitudes, emotions, and thoughts, end quote. In 1960, back in the United States of America, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare published Soviet education programs in 1960, in which the author stated, quote, wherever we went, we felt the pulse of the Soviet government's drive to educate and train a new generation of technically skilled citizens. The USSR plans to bring all secondary school children into labor education and training experiences through the regular school program, end quote. Are our children human beings, ladies and gentlemen, or human capital? The 1960s were a time of turmoil in the United States. Radical students became members of organizations such as the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and in James Simon Kunin's The Strawberry Statement, 1968, he recounts an SDS strategy meeting in which a student gave a report about an SDS convention the student had recently attended. And the report revealed that, and I quote, men from business international roundtables tried to buy up a few radicals. These men are the world's industrialists, and they convene to decide how our lives are going to go. They're the left wing of the ruling class. They offered to finance our demonstrations in Chicago. We were also offered ESSO, which is Rockefeller money. The acronym ESSO is derived from Standard Oil Company. They want us to make a lot of radical commotion so they can look more in the center as they move more to the left, end quote. Now, at first, this seems strange. Why in the world would leading business people want radical commotion and a move to the left? Don't they want economic stability? Well, folks, not if they want to move the consciousness of the people away from nationalism and toward internationalism for a global economy, and not if they are coming to consider human beings as mere, quote, human capital, end quote. In fact, by 1970, Americans were coming to be thought of as human capital by leading intellectuals like Lester Thurow, whose 1970 book entitled The New Socialist Revolution proclaimed, quote, "Education will be radically transformed in our socialist community. The main emphasis will be on learning how to live and work collectively. The next level is learning some series of skills for one's first set of jobs," end quote. And Vladimir Turchenko's The Scientific and Technological Revolution and the Revolution in Education, published in 1976, stresses the need for, quote, "linking instruction with productive labor," end quote. Can't happen in America? I beg your pardon. It already is happening in America and has been happening for many years. You see, this is the essence of school to work. The student is only educated to the extent that his future employer requires, which is the way labor and education have been linked in communist countries for decades. For those experiencing difficulty with the idea of leading capitalists supporting leftist labor and educational initiatives, remember, folks, that to the men at the top, there's very little difference between monopoly capitalism, communism, and fascism. In fact, in all three, competition is absent and top-down control is maximized. In the May 1997 edition of the Christian Conscience, Dr. Cuddy cited the words of well-known capitalist David Rockefeller, who wrote, quote, "From a China Traveler," end quote, which appeared in the August 10th, 1973 edition of the New York Times. He said, and I quote, "One is impressed immediately by the sense of national harmony. There's a very real and pervasive dedication to Chairman Mao and Maoist principles. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded, not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. General social and economic progress is no less impressive. The enormous social advances of China have benefited greatly from the singleness of ideology and purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in history," end quote. 24 years later, David Rockefeller remains one of the prime supporters of the same murderous communist Chinese regime, which at the time he wrote those words was just completing the termination of 7.3 million units of surplus human capital in Chairman Mao's glorious Cultural Revolution. The source for that is Death by Government by Professor R.J. Rummel. You can find it on page 100. In the early 1980s, ladies and gentlemen, neither the Soviet nor German socialist education systems had been adopted nationwide in the United States. As Professor Eugene Boyce in The Coming Revolution in Education, 1983, wrote, quote, "In the communist ideology, education is tied directly to jobs. No such direct, controlled relationship between education and jobs exists in democratic countries," end quote. However, in 1985, two things happened. At the beginning of the year, the Carnegie Corporation gave $600,000 to establish the Carnegie Forum on Education and the Economy. And later that year, the Carnegie Corporation negotiated the Soviet-American Exchange Agreement for the United States government, whereby Soviet educators became involved in planning curricula of some United States schools. In the winter 1987-1988 edition of Action in Teacher Education, Professors Martin Haberman and James Collins wrote in, quote, The Future of the Teaching Profession, unquote, that, quote, schooling is now seen primarily as job training, and for this reason, quite comparable to schooling in non-democratic societies. Once education is redefined as a personal good and as emphasizing preparation for the world of work as its first purpose, our schools can appropriately be compared with those of the USSR, end quote. Also, in 1988, the Carnegie Forum became the National Center on Education and the Economy, NCEE, with Mark Tucker as president. And the next year, 1989, was asked to help in developing the national education goals upon which America 2000 and later Goals 2000 would be based. In the spring of 1990, NCEE formed the National Alliance for Restructuring Education with its hallmark, the Certificate of Initial Mastery, or the CIM, without which workers, quote, will be condemned to dead-end jobs that leave them in poverty even if they are working, end quote, according to NCCE's America's Choice, High Skills are Low Wages. Are you beginning to understand the message of this broadcast? I certainly hope so. If you love your children, you had better. Anticipating there may be some difficulties in gaining public support for this restructuring, the National Alliance had the Industrial Areas Foundation produce a concept paper engaging the public one way to organize. The IAF was founded by radical Saul Alinsky, admired by Hillary Clinton, who included an acknowledgement to Lucifer at the front of his book, Rules for Radicals, admitting that he is a worshiper of Satan. Relevant to STW, the IAF concept paper states that, quote, schools face the challenges of preparing students for a labor market in an economy that is increasingly global in nature and requires of its workers the ability to be lifelong learners, end quote. Remember several years ago when I told you that the goal of the New World Order is to be able to control you from the day you're born until the day you die, and that the implemented organization for this control will be community mental health centers and schools that eventually will be combined into one organization. And people will literally go to school from birth to grave. But your education will be channeled in the interest of the state and big business, not in your interests whatsoever. The concept paper goes on, ladies and gentlemen, to describe how trained facilitators, known as, quote, change agents, end quote, can apply a gradual process to push for a consensus around desired outcomes. Furthermore, there are training sessions in which parents and community members gain an understanding of where they fit within the system. In the process, parental interaction with the school begins to change parents' attitudes, change from being distrustful to being supportive, end quote. You see, I was right. I don't like being right. So America's skills and America's choice and America's wages and America's children and America's parents all fit into this. And we're going to continue this tomorrow. A great portion of the research conducted for today's broadcast was done by Dennis Cuddy, Ph.D. and taken from Relevance Magazine, Volume 4, Number 11. We will continue this in tomorrow's episode of The Hour of the Time. Don't miss it, folks. If you love your children, you cannot miss these broadcasts. You must know what they intend to do with the minds of your children and ultimately with the minds of the parents and the community through your children. Good night And God bless each and every single one of you. You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Yesterday, folks, we began our expose of the Marxist socialist engineering of the education of our children, using our children to spy upon the parents and the community, and as a method of social engineering for the future socialist totalitarian one world government, which is in the process of formation as we speak today. This latest little debacle with Iraq has bolstered the image of the United Nations in the eyes of the world, and if the United Nations gets its way, has put the United States in its place. And that's exactly what all this is, of course, intended to do. A lot of the research used in yesterday's broadcast, today's, and possibly tomorrow's, comes from Dennis Cuddy, Ph.D. He has, well, let me give you a little bit of a background on Dr. Cuddy. He's done an awful lot of research and study on the nationalization of education and its merger with labor through the Clinton-backed School to Work program. And folks, for over a decade, Dr. Cuddy has been an exhaustive researcher into the high-level machinations of the world's power elite. He's a former teacher. He knows what he's talking about. He taught in the public school system and at the university level. He served as a senior associate in the United States Department of Education for 6 years during the Reagan administration. He has a Ph.D. in American history. He's been a stunningly effective voice of accurate and disciplined criticism of the accelerating transformation of American education into an apparatus of subtle socialist coercion and, of course, social engineering. He's written numerous letters and commentary, and they've been featured over the years in the op-ed pages of national newspapers and magazines. He's also authored a dozen books and booklets on a wide range of topics. We're also taking information from Relevance Magazine, volume number 4, issue number 11, and from the tons of research that I and the members of my organizations have done over the years. So make sure you have pen and paper, make sure you're ready to take notes, and listen very carefully, folks, because what you're going to hear is going to really open your eyes. And if you have children in public school, it might make you very angry. If you missed yesterday's broadcast, you can make arrangements to order it, but you can't do it through this station or through the Independence Foundation Trust. You can contact Harvest Trust. Write a letter to Harvest Trust, P.O. Box 2470, Pine Top, Arizona 85935. That's Harvest Trust, P.O. Box 2470, Pine Top, Arizona 85935. That's 85935. And ask the Harvest Trust for a current tape list, and it helps if you send $1 along to them for their troubles. Don't go away, folks. I'll be right back in just a second, and we'll start with the continuation of our subject matter.
Like you could make it. Welcome to the new world order. Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've exported your jobs and surrendered our arms. They want it. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. The Illuminati wants you to be a slave from birth to grave. The banksters own the Federal Reserve. It's private. They own it. It's neither federal nor reserve. The cashiers make that fiat funny money stuff you call dollars for 2 pennies. They lend it back to us at full face value, then charge you interest. You get the debt. They get the interest. They get the gold. You get the check. They want it. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. It is a big idea. It is a big idea.
Oh, yes, it is a big idea. Too big for their britches, I think. America's Choice, High Skills or Low Wages was released in June 1990 by the National Center on Education and the Economy, known as NCEE, with board members including Hillary Marxist Clinton and David Rockefeller. And if you think I'm kidding about Hillary Clinton being a Marxist, the record of her charitable donations throughout the years, ladies and gentlemen, shows a long list of Marxist socialist organizations, some of which are well known for their terrorist activities throughout the world. America's Choice High Skills or Low Wages was produced by NCEE's Commission on the Skills of the American Workforce, which included Laura DeAndrea Tyson, Director of Research of the Berkeley Roundtable on the International Economy at the University of California at Berkeley. Tyson has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. David Rockefeller, Chairman, 1970 to 1985, and would later be appointed Chairman of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors. America's Choice High Skills or Low Wages proposed that students receive a certificate of initial mastery and laid out guidelines for a workforce development program that would seek to influence public policy and legislation regarding CIMs and STW systems. It also greatly influenced the work of the United States Labor Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills, called SCANS, begun likewise in 1990. In its reports, the SCANS recommended the establishment of a, quote, nationwide system of human resource development, assessment, and certification, end quote. It also instructed business that, quote, your responsibilities must include developing the human resources in your community, your firm, and your nation, end quote, and stated that learning SCANS know-how competencies will, quote, take place through employers and work-based education and should continue for a lifetime, end quote. Remember what I told you. The goal is to control every living human being on the face of this earth from birth until death. The school and the community mental health center will become the center of the community, and you will literally go to school from the time you're born until the time you die. And this is just another confirmation of what I've been telling you. Almost all of the recommendations of the SCANS reports were then incorporated into the 1994 Goals 2000 Act and the 1994 School to Work Opportunities Act. How do you like being called a human resource instead of people or human beings? You are now a source of productivity in the business sector. In September of 1990, 3 months after America's Choice was released, Robert Brecht's Polytechnical Education, a STEP, was published by the National Center for Research in Vocational Education at the University of California at Berkeley, with funding from the United States Department of Education. And in this document, ladies and gentlemen, one reads that, quote, the Soviet Union has developed a curriculum known as polytechnical education, rooted in Marxist-Leninist ideology. The German Democratic Republic has accomplished a good deal with its polytechnical education. The ideology of the Soviet education has blessed the melding of restructured academic studies and the preparation of students for skilled labor. That this should be carefully monitored for possible adaptation in American public education is not a far-fetched idea, end quote. In February of the next year, 1991, NCEE formed the New Standards Project, which included Hillary Clinton and likewise promoted the Certificate of Initial Mastery. In January 1996, New York State Attorney General Dennis Vacho opened an investigation into payments made by NCEE to Hillary Clinton and her Rose Law Firm between 1990 and 1992. Payments of $23,000 and $150,000 were made for work promoting NCEE's proposals to improve the skills of American workers. NCEE retained Mrs. Clinton from February 1991 through January 31, 1992, to direct its workforce skills program. Mrs. Clinton did not report the money on her tax return. In addition, the tax-exempt NCEE enjoys state funding, and at least one of the payments may have been made during the 1992 presidential campaign. A recent call to the New York State Attorney General's office indicated that the investigation is ongoing. The New Standards Project published a concept paper, Effective Public Engagement, prepared for the Public Agenda Foundation. The concept paper indicates the standards will be national, and new standards, national tests, will rely on open-ended questions, which means subjective grading. The concept paper goes on to say that answers will be graded by more than one teacher, from school to school. Nationwide teams of teachers will look at the tests from different communities, and in describing who will set the national standards to be tested, the concept paper states that teachers, along with individuals from business and academia, will identify what they want high school graduates to know and be able to do. Outcome-based education is exactly what it is. Notice, folks, that parents are not mentioned anywhere. In his Richmond Times-Dispatch column, working on the Goals 2000 Systemic Change Gang, October 19, 1994, opinion page editor Robert Holland referred to the Public Agenda Foundation when describing a community action toolkit developed by the United States Department of Education and its tax-funded regional laboratories, about to be distributed by the National Education Goals Panel. Holland noted that among the toolkit's contents were, and I quote, letters to the editor op-ed pieces, featured stories, radio spots, and even entire speeches already written endorsing the national education push. A troubleshooting guide for dealing with opponents, case histories of how opponents can be co-opted in order to implement curriculum changes, step-by-step plans for manufacturing support through the use of so-called facilitators and change agents. Change agents are people who steer public meetings toward a phony consensus. NCEE said one of its partners, the Public Agenda Foundation, already had been successful in designing and orchestrating citizen education campaigns in 5 communities. That's where the toolkit now comes into play. And sure enough, the Public Agenda Foundation's 7-stage journey to correct thinking is contained therein. At stage 1, citizens may not yet recognize that there is no going back to the basics in education. We must go forward to a set of new basics required for success in today's increasingly complex and competitive global economy, end quote. The New Standards Project, together with the National Alliance for Restructuring Education, include over half the students in the United States. In the same year as the New Standards Project was begun, 1991, various SCANS reports were released, including one in June of that year, recommending the establishment of a national system for certifying competency similar to Germany's, quote, Certificate of Mastery, end quote. In a SCANS report for America 2000, which was titled Skills and Tasks for Jobs, Chapter 3 provides information on 35 jobs. And the report states, quote, for each job, you will find the SCANS competencies and foundations rated in descending order of importance or criticality for that job, end quote. Curiously, for the job licensed practical nurse, of 17 foundation skills, arithmetic is listed as 11th and reading as 15th. For the job programming technician, the foundation skill, integrity, honesty, is listed as 13th, and the mathematics as 16th. And for the job hotel account executive, sales executive, the foundation skill, integrity, honesty, is listed as 11th, and arithmetic as last, 17th. Also, in 1991, the Carnegie Foundation chairman David Hornbeck, a former out-based education consultant for the Business Roundtable, co-edited Human Capital and America's Future, which described an approach Hornbeck admitted might be subject to the charge of Big Brotherism. Governor Bill Clinton wrote an endorsement of the book, saying that it, quote, defines the very heart of America's opportunities for the future, an educated workforce. This book gives us a blueprint for achieving the dreams of so many people, end quote. It's pretty hard to quote these people without wanting to shove something right in their face. Got to tell you, folks, it's just sickening. Among those dreaming was NCEE President Mark Tucker, who in 1992 co-authored Thinking for a Living, which stated, quote, as this is written, the former members of the communist bloc in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union are setting out to fashion new societies. Many of those countries have done a better job than we of building effective human resource development programs, end quote. You see how everything that they're doing is based upon something that the communists have done in the past. From beginning to end. There is no other reference, ladies and gentlemen. The same year, NCEE developed a Human Resources Development Plan for the United States that advocated a, quote, national system of education in which curriculum, pedagogy, examinations and teacher education and licensure systems are all linked to the national standards, and the standards are the same everywhere, end quote. On August the 2nd, Assistant Labor Secretary Robert Jones of the Bush administration announced that the federal government was preparing to deny aid and student loans to schools that fail to prepare their graduates with the skills needed to compete for jobs in the modern workplace, admitting, quote, "This is a touchy subject," end quote. Shortly thereafter, Bill Clinton won the presidential election, and on November the 11th, Mark Tucker wrote his now infamous letter to Hillary Clinton. In it, he informed her that he had just come from David Rockefeller's office where they were celebrating Bill Clinton's election as president because that would allow putting into place their agenda to integrate education into a national system of, quote, human resources development from cradle to grave for everyone. We propose that Bill Clinton take a leaf out of the German book, end quote. Regarding required apprenticeship slots, relevant to this, however, was a paper commissioned by the School to Work Transition Team in the Office of Educational Research and Improvement, called OERI, within the United States Department of Education, one of a set of commissioned papers published by OERI in June 1994. In this paper, ladies and gentlemen, quote, "Determinants and consequences of fit between vocational education and employment in Germany," end quote. Professor James Witt and Arne Kalleberg stated that, quote, "The German apprenticeship system is so expensive, Germany's contemporary vocational education system is closely linked to its secondary educational system. At age 10, students are tracked in a rigid educational system. After initial assignment, movement between tracks is rare," end quote. In other words, once they have slotted your child for a certain vocational education or a certain place in industry or business, that's it. Apprenticeships are an important part of many STW programs, and Germany's apprenticeship program is often regarded as a model for us to emulate. It is a comprehensive system of training and certification for 377 specific occupations. However, Drs. Witt and Kalleberg also found that the German system's training of apprentices was extremely costly, and only about half of them eventually took jobs that fit their training. Many apprentice bakers eventually worked for Ford Motor Company, as a matter of fact. And Syracuse University, where, incidentally, I just spoke as a guest of the African American Student Association, Syracuse University economist Kenneth Couch's study revealed that German apprenticeship graduates didn't make any more money on average than other high school graduates 5 to 14 years after their certification. Furthermore, the San Francisco Chronicle economics editor, Jonathan Marshall, wrote in the March 1995 issue of Reason, quote, "America's lack of a formal system for training youth may be a strength, not a weakness. In a fluid job market where employer demands are changing constantly, specific job training in their teen years may be wasted." Studies show that developing general skills and cognitive ability rather than narrow vocational education helps students perform better on the job and in further education, end quote. On March 31st, 1994, Congress passed what was formally titled Goals 2000 Educate America Act. It was largely written for United States Secretary of Education Richard Riley by Michael Cohen, an ally of NCEE President Mark Tucker and the former director of NCEE's National Alliance for Restructuring Education. Prior to working for the National Alliance, Cohen had directed a project on restructuring the education system agenda for the 90s for the National Governors Association. The NGA's Center for Policy Research received $691,000 from the Carnegie Corporation for this project. The V of Goals 2000 created a National Skills Standards Board, a member of which would be Carolyn Warner, former superintendent of public instruction for Arizona, and a recent featured speaker in Beijing, China. According to the Arizona Republic, January 7, 1975, Warner ranked teachers higher in importance than the parents of their students, remarking that those who educate are more to be honored than those who bear children. How do you like that? That's the kind of thinking these people have. The latter gave them only life, the former teach them the art of living. The absolute despicable audacity of these new breed of reducators. That's right, I said reducators, Marxist, socialists, is seen in Warner's presenting as undisputed fact the bizarre notion that teachers, not parents, are the traditional instructors in the age-old task of teaching the child the art of living. I get so angry when I hear these people talk. It's like they're living on some other planet and actually don't understand the slightest basic principles and ideals upon which this nation was founded and that made it the greatest nation in the world, with the highest standard of living. At one time, the best educational system in the world, and a lot of other things. The fact that we're on the downhill slide is because of these people, ladies and gentlemen. These people are destroying this country from within. They're not Americans. They're Marxist socialists. And if they had their way, and if it was fashionable to admit it, they'd come right out and tout communism. Because according to Karl Marx and Lenin himself, the ultimate goal of socialism is communism. Make no mistake about it. And if you think communism is dead in the world, read Mr. Gorbachev's book, Perestroika, where he will tell you clearly that the fall of the Soviet Union was a deception to disarm the West. And then read Golitsyn, the high-ranking KGB defector, who told us years in advance that there would be a deceptive disintegration of the Soviet Union in order to disarm the West and bring about a socialist, totalitarian, one-world government. And then go back and replay the old newsreels or videotapes of Khrushchev banging his shoe on his desk in the General Assembly of the United Nations, declaring to the world that, quote, "We do not have to invade you, we do not have to bomb you, we will destroy you from within," end quote. And that's exactly what they're doing. If there was one place where NCEE's and Tucker's grand design should have worked, it was Rochester, New York, which had its school system virtually taken over by NCE in the late 1980s. However, by the mid-1990s, it was becoming clear that the Rochester schools were a disaster, total failure. According to that city's newspaper, the Democrat and Chronicle, May 7th, 1995, quote, 40% of ninth graders don't make it through high school. Fewer graduates attain the state's more stringent Regents diploma. Most middle and high school test scores remained flat or declined. Teams of administrators, teachers, and parents formed to improve schools often didn't work well together. Middle schools created to cater to the needs of early adolescents are large, chaotic, and occasionally violent. "We have failed," said Mayor William A. Johnson, Jr., end quote. But that doesn't deter these people. They want to implement these procedures nationwide. Why doesn't it deter them? Because the whole goal, ladies and gentlemen, is to dumb down the nation so that the people of the United States of America will accept their place in the new socialist world order. That's why the Constitution is not taught in our schools anymore. That's why the principles and ideals and the real history of this country are not taught to the students of our public schools. The editor of Relevance magazine tells me that he contacted the Washington office of the National Center on Education and the Economy and asked for comment on Dr. Cuddy's criticism of the center's backing of school to work. A press spokesman suggested that such criticism simply meant that the center's work wasn't properly understood. He offered to have an NCEE specialist on school to work call us back to comment. We welcomed the offer. However, as we go to press, we have received no response from the NCEE, end quote, and he won't either. And now, if they thought he was just another community sheeple, they would hear back. And they would browbeat him and BS him and baffle him with baloney until he accepted as right their dictates. But he's not that kind of person, ladies and gentlemen. He's not that kind of person, ladies and gentlemen. Philip M. O'Halloran would have won that battle, and that's why they didn't call him back. Nor will they. They've never returned any of my calls either. On May 4th, 1994, just over a month after Goals 2000 became law, Congress passed the School to Work Opportunities Act, which provided that states receiving federal funds under this act had to coordinate their efforts with Goals 2000 and the National Skills Standards Act. Everybody thinks they're getting something from nothing from the federal government. The foundation in law states that whoever receives a benefit from a benefactor must accept the benefactor's dictation on how they can use that benefit. There are always strings attached, ladies and gentlemen. And all of you out there, all of you who think in your wildest dreams that you're getting something for nothing from the federal government or even the state government, you need your heads examined. No government has anything that didn't first come out of the pockets of the people. What is wrong with you people? If you kept all your money at home, listen to me carefully. If you kept all of your money that goes out of your community at home, you could have the best school system, the best teachers, and the best educated children in the world. You could have the best paid streets, the best hospital, the best medical care in the world. You could have charities set up to take care of your homeless, people who are the victims of accidents, and the infirm and the elderly. The best in the world. Because out of every dollar that leaves your community, 95 cents of it disappears into the vast bureaucracy to pay these social engineers. And you think you're getting something for free when 5 cents of it comes back to you. It's a shame that F.W. Woolworth closed because there's a lot of other people that would like to go purchase brains like that. People wonder why I get so upset. I used to have the most trust in the American people that you can imagine. And all we have to do is tell them what's happening. Source it, document it. They're smart. They love freedom. They won't let this happen. Boy, was I in for a big surprise. Most people don't want to be bothered with anything. Just how to have a good time, where to get their next Budweiser, or how to get their next roll in the hay, or when they're going to have their next party, or how they're going to get the money to buy their RV or their boat, and to hell with everybody and everything else. They don't know what's going on in their city council. They don't know what's going on at their county supervisor's board meeting. They don't know what's going on in the county. They don't know what's going on in the state. How in the world can they even comment on what's going on at a national level? But they will. Oh, yes, they pretend like they know something. Now, if that makes you angry, I've hit it right on the nail. I have hit you right square between the eyes with the truth. If that upsets you, you are a sheeple, and you know it. And that's why it upsets you. It's like somebody walking down the street, and all of a sudden, somebody comes running out of a bank and says, "Stop, thief! Stop that bank robber!" Only the bank robber gets angry and runs, folks. Everybody else just turns around and looks to see if they can see what's going on. So if it makes you angry when I talk like this, then I'm right on the money. I've hit my target, and you're it. You are exactly who I'm talking about. And you can pretend it's not true. You can blame all your problems on me or anybody else, but sooner or later, you're going to have to get up in the morning, go in the bathroom, and look yourself in the mirror. Make sure you close the door so nobody sees your big, giant alligator tears, because sooner or later you're going to realize that I'm right. Everybody out there, if you want to know what's wrong with America, go in your bathroom and look in the mirror. And don't think I'm lording it over on you, and don't think I'm some kind of elitist that feels that I'm better than anybody, because I'm going to tell you right now, for most of my life, that was me too. Just I woke up one day. I went in the bathroom, looked myself in the mirror, and big tears streamed out, and I said, "Bill, you've been a stupid, fool, ignorant, apathetic idiot all your life, and that's got to change right now." And it did. So I have a lot of empathy. I understand where you're at. I understand what it feels like. I also understand it's got to change immediately if we're going to maintain our freedom and if we're going to have any kind of a decent life in the future. You see, I can guarantee that not one single person listening to this broadcast will like living under socialism. None of you. And if you don't believe that, there's a lot of socialist countries in this world. Take a vacation, a long vacation, because a week isn't enough. And go live under that socialism just like the local people do. And then come back and tell me how much you enjoy it. It's coming here, soon, to a local theater near you. Only it won't be on the screen. It will be at the box office and in the seats. It will be you and me and everybody else who loses this battle. And it is a battle. The publication, ladies and gentlemen, also referred to planning and programming, like that employed by the notorious PPBS outlined in the fall 1995 relevance special report called New World Orders, the One World Movement versus United States Sovereignty, an issue that I've expounded upon for many hours on this broadcast. And like the hour of the time, Phil O'Halloran documents and sources what he says. It also referred to International Standards Organization 9000, or ISO 9000, which is a Geneva-based United Nations offshoot. The ISO series, which sets international standards for manufacturing, will become more and more important as education is internationalized. Now, folks, I hope you keep in mind at this point that the philosophy behind STW is that society must be managed, usually by a self-appointed elite. Not only have businesses like grocery store chains begun to adopt TQM, but so have school systems, which are also including it as part of their STW programs. STW is School to Work. in case you forgot. In this regard, Richmond Times-Dispatch opinion page editor Robert Holland wrote of Tim Clem, a former Xerox executive for 10 years and a certified TQM trainer, in a July 9, 1997 column entitled "TQM and STW Combine as the Twin Thieves of Individualism." Holland wrote this, quote, "Now, Clem speaks out strongly against TQM's use as an instrument to alter American society radically. Few Americans, says Clem, have a clue that the Federal School to Work Opportunities Act, a system currently being installed in all 50 states, extends TQM thinking into the schooling of America's children. To institute the TQM process, corporate trainers must bring about a total cultural change, wherein all employees shed their individualism for a unified set of corporate values. If corporations could hire new employees already steeped in TQM, they could save millions of dollars in training costs. That's where School to Work, a system avidly supported by many multinational corporations, comes in. As Clem noted, the STWOA is the School to Work Opportunities Act, in case you forgot that too, explicitly calls for all students, all of them, to be steeped in TQM techniques of group problem solving and associated attitudes. In other words, socialist or Marxist collectivism. The STWOA, that was an end quote, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. The STWOA also calls for all students to be assessed according to such affective skills as self-esteem, working in a group, and appreciating diversity. As with TQM, Clem notes STW reduces all jobs to a task level. The feds are rating the level of skill that will be necessary for performing each task, and STW is to match up students with those skills needed in the area workforce. The assessments of a student's personal qualities and TQM competencies go to prospective employers. That's the way TQM and STW have been wired to work together. It would be very hard to imagine any piece of social engineering more destructive of individual initiative, inventiveness, and enterprise. In short, the destruction of the American dream. The undermining, ladies and gentlemen, of American individualism and independence has actually been underway for quite some time, a long time, as a matter of fact. Many educators today call themselves progressive and think highly of the father of progressive education, John Dewey. But those of us in the know that John Dewey is the man responsible for the stupidity of half of the nation's youth. Graduating children from high school that can't even read. Promoting students to the next higher grade level up when they can't pass the grade level that they're in, for fear that their self-esteem might be damaged. Not only was John Dewey a leader in the intercollegiate socialist society elite, but he also wrote in Democracy and Education in 1916 that, quote, "Dependence denotes a power rather than a weakness. There is always a danger that increased personal independence will decrease the social capacity of an individual. In making himself reliant, it often makes an individual develop an illusion of being really able to stand and act alone, an unnamed form of insanity which is responsible for a large part of the remedial suffering of the world," end quote. According to Dewey, then, if you're dependent, you're normal. But if you're independent and self-reliant, you're insane. And that is the basic premise of socialism. This attitude, espoused by the really insane John Dewey and his insane followers, has had a lot to do with the development of the welfare state dependency and victimology we are witnessing today. You see, everybody has to be a victim or socialism cannot triumph. And when you allow yourself to be a victim, you are promoting the victory of socialism and your own enslavement in the dependency upon the state big brother who will change your diapers, tell you when to go to bed, when to get up, provide your entertainment for you, make sure that you have a job, and force feed you whether you want to eat or not. They'll stick a tube down your throat and shovel it in. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, human beings are now thought of as human resources, or human capital, not people, or human beings. Miss America for 1996, Chantel Smith, presented STW as her program for the pageant. And when visiting Michigan, she spoke about our investment in human capital. That's what School to Work is all about. In 1996, with funding from the United States Departments of Labor, Education, and Health and Human Services, the National Governors Association produced Building State Systems Based on Performance, the Workforce Development Experience, a Guide for States, which on page 46 refers to people as, quote, humanware, end quote, spelled Humanware. I quote, just 8 days after the President delivered his State of the Union address on February the 12th, which called for national education standards, Congressman Henry Hyde, along with federal and state legislators, held a conference on Capitol Hill to discuss the crises in American schools. Hyde stated, the profound changes in school curricula are happening under the guise of reform. The reason? The changes are designed to turn our nation's elementary and high schools into a coerced training ground for the labor market. These changes are designed to guarantee an ample supply of low-wage earners for jobs employers now have trouble filling, end quote, and will ensure that your child never has a chance to challenge the children of the elite on their own ground, never to become President of the United States, never to become a United States Senator, never to become a chief executive officer of any corporation in the world, never to found their own business and make it succeed and improve the status and standard of living of themselves and their family. Never, 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 never. And if you think otherwise, you are playing a fool's game. American students are constantly hearing school to work being promoted as a means of preparing them for all the high-tech jobs of the future. What crap! However, U.S. Senator Richard Bryan of Nevada, appearing on C-SPAN on April 4, 1997, said, quote, there are 10% fewer employed in high-tech jobs than in 1990, end quote. Furthermore, in the monthly Labor Review, November 1995, published by the United States Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, there is a table entitled, quote, Occupations with the Largest Job Growth, 1994 to 2005, Moderate Alternative Projection, end quote, which lists the top 4 largest job growth areas as follows. Listen to this carefully, ladies and gentlemen, because this is where your children will be going. Cashiers, janitors, and cleaners, including maids and housekeeping cleaners, salespersons, retail, waiters, and waitresses. And there's nothing wrong with these professions, ladies and gentlemen, if you choose or your children choose to go into that profession. There are some very honest, hard-working, and good people in this country who are in those professions, but they chose those professions. They weren't forced into those professions, like your children will be in the School to Work programs. They will be channeled into the professions where people are needed to be employed, and they can tell you whatever they want. That's the reality of the situation. If there are only 10,000 new job opportunities in high-tech throughout the nation each year, that means only 10,000 students will go into those jobs, and the other millions of students will go into cashiers, janitors, and cleaners, including maids and housekeeping, cleaners, salespersons, retail, waiters, and waitresses. Check the Monthly Labor Review, June 1997, page 16 for yourself. Don't believe a word I'm saying, unless you can prove it in your own research. Listen to everyone, read everything. But unless you conduct your own research, you will never know the truth. You will never know who's telling you the truth. You will never know who's lying to you. You will never know when you're being manipulated and controlled. And most of you, for most of your life, are being lied to, manipulated, and controlled. Whether you believe it or not, whether you want to admit it or not, it's the truth. Currently, students have the most to say about what career paths they take. But as human capital, their paths increasingly will be directed by society via school-to-work, outcome-based educational programs so that they, quote, demonstrate certain skills, end quote. A leading outcome-based education consultant today, Harvard University professor Howard Gardner, who was involved in the infamous MACOS, or MACOS project, wrote Frames of Mind, the theory of multiple intelligences. In it, he proposed that ultimately the educational plans that are pursued need to be orchestrated across various interest groups of the society so that they can, taken together, help the society to achieve its larger goals. That's called social engineering in simple terms that you can understand. He goes on to say, individual profiles must be considered in the light of goals pursued by the wider society, and sometimes, in fact, individuals with gifts in certain directions must nonetheless be guided along other, less favored paths, simply because the needs of the culture are particularly urgent in that realm at that time, end quote. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, even though one may have the desire and skills to choose one career, if society needs individuals in an other, less favored career, then the individual should be guided toward those other careers. This attitude has caused criticism of school to work, as Margaret Terry Orr of the Institute on Education and the Economy at Columbia University's Teachers College remarked, quote, "Not everyone embraces school to work. There is a deep fear we are going to track children into dead-end careers," end quote. I'm telling you right now, it's exactly what they're going to do. Relevant to the type of careers into which a student may be guided due to the, quote, needs, end quote, of her or his society at a particular time, Robert Holland wrote in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, February the 19th, 1997, and I quote, "Out in Las Vegas, Renee Tucker tells me that her daughter, Darcy, recently was pulled out of a geography class without parental consent to be administered a computerized assessment of career possibilities. Darcy wants to become a veterinarian, but the computer said she ought to become a bartender or waitress, and it spat out a list of courses she ought to take in high school toward that end. Mrs. Tucker said, quote, "We're Christians, and the school stepped on my toes as a parent. It is my job to direct my child's career path, and it would not be in her best interest to be a bartender," end quote. But it might be in Nevada's best interest. You see, given the huge hospitality needs driven by the gambling and the entertainment industry, it just might be in the best interest of government. Right? Of course, the federal government isn't promoting school to work as something imposed upon the people by Washington, but rather as partnerships among members of communities. This is their deceptive language. Anytime you go to any meeting where there is supposed to be a public discourse on the benefits, the merits, or the distractions, or the derogatory points concerning these things, believe me when I tell you that the audience is seated. The whole meeting was planned and will be controlled through its course to present a false consensus for and in favor of school to work and all of these programs that they want. And unless you are an astute, very smart judge of human nature and a very, very keen observer, you'll never know it. You better prepare yourselves to confront these people. Take back your school districts. Educate your children in what they need to learn to succeed in society, become what they want to become, not what someone else thinks they ought to be. Because pretty soon, it will shift from ought to must to jail term if you don't. Or for parents, if they stand in the way, they'll be breaking the law and going to prison. Eventually, that's exactly what's going to happen. The September 1997 issue of Community Update, a United States Department of Education newsletter, announced a September 16th satellite town meeting entitled Back to School, Families and Communities Working Together. The letter notes that U.S. Secretary of Education Richard Riley and panelists will emphasize the great need for community-wide partnerships. The Learning Channel will rebroadcast the September satellite town meeting on October 28th, and they did. The United States Department of Education produced the satellite town meeting series in partnership with the National Alliance of Business and the Center for Workforce Preparation. Most Americans never saw it. Well, I hope I've given you food for thought. We will continue with this tomorrow on the hour of the time. Don't miss it. If you know somebody who has school-age children, make sure they're listening to 101.1 FM. Good night, folks, and God bless each and every single one of you. You're listening once again to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will continue and finish our topic for the last couple of days. Today we'll make 3 on the plans of the National Education Association, the United States Department of Education, and the Socialist Change Agents for our children's education, their future, your future, and, of course, how they use your children in their schools to spy on you and the community in order to get the information they need to alter your behavior and attitudes and bring about their socialist utopian state. You don't want to miss a bit of this, folks. And if you have someone who has school-age children, even though they may have missed the first 2 broadcasts, call them up. Tell them to tune in to 101.1 FM Eager, or to 9.955 megahertz shortwave worldwide. Don't go away. Make sure you have pen and paper, and I'll be right back.
Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've exported your jobs and surrendered our arms. They want it. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. A new world order. The Illuminati wants you to be a slave from birth to grave. The banksters own the Federal Reserve. It's private. They own it. It's neither federal nor a reserve. The cashiers make that fiat funny money stuff you call dollars for 2 pennies. They lend it back to us at full face value. Then charge you interest. You get the debt. They get the interest. They get the gold. You get the shell. They want is a new world order. A new world order. A new world order. It is a big idea. It is a big idea. A new world order. CFR controls the CIA, the FBI, the ATF, and the FDA. They don't give a damn about the POW and the MIA. Hillary, Billary, Hitler, Marx, and Mao.
Well, folks, I hope you're all ready to end our discussion that began 2 days ago, because we're going to finish it up today. Again, I want to tell you that some of this came from a subscription magazine called Relevance, which only contains 1 story each issue. They do excellent research. An awful lot of it came from the research of Dennis Cuddy, Ph.D., who has been a tireless researcher into the high-level machinations of the world's power elite, especially in the realm of education. He was a former teacher in the public school system and at the university level. He also served as a senior associate in the the United States Department of Education for 6 years during the Reagan administration. He has a Ph.D. in American history, and so he knows what he's talking about. Also interspersed in all of this is my own research and the research of those people who belong to my organizations, CAGI, the Intelligence Service, and Veritas News Service, and who collect information from all over the world and send it to me. Every day I get a flood of mail that we have to go through, and about 400 emails each day, not to mention the phone calls, faxes, and everything else that we get here. That's our business information. So if you've got your pen and paper by your side, here we go. In order for students to be guided in certain career directions based upon society's needs, student profiles are an important part of certain school-to-work initiatives, and employers will have continual access to these profiles as part of a permanent file on all individuals who are now considered to be lifelong learners. In communist China, the file is called a dangan and describes the value of the individual to the state. Unfortunately, today, ladies and gentlemen, there seem to be similarities between school to work in the United States and the dangan in communist China. Critics, in fact, have compared Tucker's own Human Resources Development, or HRDP, to the Chinese communist dangan. a file describing the value of the individual to the state. In a New York Times article, Personal File and Worker Yoked for Life, dated March 16, 1992, it says that the Dangan contains political evaluations that affect career prospects. Tucker's HRDP does not advocate that political evaluations be included in the fully computerized integrated labor market database he proposes. However, he does say the cradle to grave. Wow, where have you heard that before? This is the first open admission. That's a direct quote right out of the HRDP. Cradle to grave. HRDP system is, quote, outcome and performance based, is for everyone, and would contain their qualifications. People's qualifications could include whether they receive a certificate of initial mastery, called CIM, which could include such potentially politically correct categories as involved citizen, perhaps whether they've performed community service, constructive thinker, collaborative contributor, boy is that loaded, understands diversity, and interprets human experience, end quote, which are all actual categories on Oregon's CIM, which is the Certificate of Mastery, Certificate of Initial Mastery, I should say. Tucker's HRDP would also include everyone's employment histories for their entire lifetime, as everyone would be, quote, lifelong learners, end quote, if not lifelong workers. Remember, I told you this years ago. Got all kinds of mail telling me I was a kook, that this could never happen, that they could never make the school the center of the community and force everybody to go to school from birth to grave, from cradle to grave. But that's exactly what they're going to do. And that's exactly what's outlined in all of this stuff. That's exactly what they say, right out of their own mouth, folks. I didn't make any of this up. In Mark Tucker's post-election letter to Hillary Clinton, outlining his human resources development program, he wrote of the need to create an, quote, employment service, end quote. And this is what he said, quote, all available frontline jobs, whether public or private, must be listed in it. The employment service, by law, this provision must be carefully designed to make sure that employers will not be subject to employment suits based on the data produced by this system. If they are subject to such suits, they will not participate, end quote. Of course, Tucker's concern about lawsuits suggests that there will be personal information or evaluations included in everyone's files regarding their qualifications and employment histories, and I'm going to tell you right now, there will be a political category. Regarding the Chinese Communist Dangan, students and workers are never allowed to see their files. But as the quoted New York Times article states, quote, they live all their lives with their files looming over them, end quote. Similar to Tucker's HRDP, the Dangan is kept, quote, on virtually everyone except peasants, end quote, and is filled with, quote, performance evaluations, end quote, and stays with the individual, quote, for a lifetime, end quote. How would you like to be shackled with that? Well, your children are going to be, if you don't do something about it. If you've got National Education Association teachers and administrators in your schools, your children are going to be taught to be good little socialist human resources in the New World Order. You can translate that as, quote, slaves, end quote. The article goes on to say, quote, a file is opened on each urban citizen when he or she enters elementary school, and it shadows the person throughout life moving on to high school, college, and employer. The Dangan affects the promotions and job opportunities, and it is difficult to escape from because any prospective employer is supposed to examine an applicant's Dangan before making a hiring decision. The Dangan is part of a web of social controls that ensure order in China. Regarding the use of the word web in the article, it is worth noting that in Tucker's letter to Hillary Clinton, he wrote, quote, "We think the great opportunity you have is to remold the entire American system for human resources development. What is essential is that we create a seamless web of opportunities to develop one skills that literally extends from cradle to grave and is the same system for everyone, young and old, poor and rich, worker and full-time student," end quote. The term seamless web also appears in a February 1994 UNESCO publication entitled Culture and Development, a Study, which described, quote, human development, end quote, and stated, quote, development is a seamless web, end quote, and, quote, the way in which education trains people for work is a criterion of its relevance, end quote. Pursuant, ladies and gentlemen, to the 1996 Welfare Reform Act on October 1st, 1997, President Clinton inaugurated the National Directory of New Hires. As the New York Times reported on September 22nd, 1997, the directory is not just for welfare recipients. That is, the directory is not just for welfare recipients. Here's what it says, quote, "It will record basic information, including names, addresses, social security numbers, and wages to be reported every 3 months for everyone hired after October 1st for a full or part-time job by any employer of any size," end quote. It has begun. Ostensibly designed to facilitate the tracking down of deadbeat dads who move out of state to avoid paying child support, the directory just happens to be tailor-made for the school-to-work planners, since it creates a file on American workers which is updated every 3 months. The New York Times adds that much more information is likely to end up in the files. Before the program has even begun, some states were already requiring the filing of telephone numbers, dates of birth, driver's license numbers, and health insurance information. And if you don't think workers' evaluations are far behind, you'd better think again. The New York Times also quoted privacy expert Robert M. Gelman. Quote, "The government is creating a gigantic new database with very broad uses and very little attention paid to the protection of personal privacy," end quote. Gelman predicted that Congress would expand the number of people authorized to use the new directory, just as it has done with other, quote, protected, end quote, information over the years. Remember what they said when they passed the Social Security law, making the Social Security tax? They said it was voluntary, and that the number would never be used for identification or for any other purpose other than Social Security. You see how they lie, ladies and gentlemen? As an example of how school-to-work federal funds come into a state, North Carolina is receiving $30 million in school-to-work monies from the United States Department of Labor. It goes to the state's Workforce Preparedness Commission, appointed by Governor James B. Hunt, Jr., until recently vice chairman of NCEE, and then down to the local level. Politics can play a role in who is appointed to the local partnership councils, whose plans have to be approved by regional workforce development boards and also at the state level. Thus, there really is no local control at all, period, end of subject. Out of your hands. School to Work, Job Ready is not a voluntary program, as all students will have to participate in it regardless of what they have told you. According to the Governor's Commission on Workforce Preparedness, quote, the Commission proposes the elimination of the general track requiring all students to be enrolled in a job-ready program, end quote. They don't care what the student wants. They don't care what's good for the student. Students will be channeled into what is good for the state or business, period. Once your child is channeled that ends all other hopes that he or she or you as parents may have ever had for your children. Also, many will find objectionable the Commission's statement that, quote, companies involved in school to work will have the opportunity to grow their own employees, and the job-ready system will ensure that every North Carolina employer is an equal partner with parents in the education of young people, end quote. The Commission report goes on to state that during grades 6 through 8, all students will develop career plans. The program here is that many students 11 to 13 years of age do not know what their careers will be. Although Job Ready permits students to change their career plans after the 8th grade now, won't be that way in the future. Many students will be reluctant to do this because they would fall behind other students of the same age who were not changing career paths. Because it means to graduate, they would have to demonstrate proficiency in their new career field. That means starting again at square one. Even proponents of school to work occasionally admit that their system is a thinly veiled form of social engineering. Well, what else could it be? Prepared by, implemented by, and put into action and supervised by Marxist, Socialist, National Education Association teachers and administrators. On July 19, 1995, the California State Senator Bill Leonard wrote a letter to California State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Delane Easton, a supporter of President Clinton's national education standards. This letter concerned the statements of Douglas Renwick, a member of the state's School to Career Curriculum Framework and Criteria Committee. According to Senator Leonard, Renwick had made the following comment at a recent committee meeting, quote, by design, we are doing social engineering. We're using education to consciously invent the future of our culture and society. Let's get to it and acknowledge what we're doing, end quote. Senator Leonard went on to write that, quote, Mr. Renwick also stated that Hitler's Nazis gave social engineering a bad name and implied that if good people were the engineers, then social engineering would be acceptable, end quote. Isn't that strange? I'll bet you Hitler's social engineers said something almost exactly, word for word, the same thing. You see, Hitler was a socialist. Nazi means National Socialist German Workers' Party. If you don't believe me, look it up. Hitler socialized Germany. Hitler was a socialist. Socialists are Nazis. Socialism is not liberal like you've been taught, ladies and gentlemen. Instead of liberalizing the world in the great liberal ideas of the founding fathers of this country, that all men are created equal and possess at birth certain unalienable, creator-endowed natural rights, socialism wants to take you backwards into the enslavement of the past. You see, ladies and gentlemen, socialism, where you create a nation or world of victims who must be taken care of by Big Brother or Big Daddy the state, is the same old medieval serfdom where the helpless victim serfs are given a piece of land and certain benefits of the landowner or landlord, and they become indentured, indebted, and enserfed for the rest of their lives. It's no different. It's feudalism is what it is. The only thing, there'll only be one feudal lord, and that will be Big Brother. It's about time that all of you sat down and started thinking about things instead of listening to these chronic liars, deceivers, and manipulators and believing what they tell you. They will lead you down the garden path. They will give you a beautiful pair of rose-colored glasses, and they will whisper lies in your ear until you realize all of a sudden that you have stepped off the edge of a cliff and are falling to your doom. And while that's happening, they will yell down to you, "Don't worry, everything's okay. We've made arrangements to catch you at the bottom." Liars to the end. Liars, that's right. If you're a socialist, I'll call you a liar to your face. It's the truth. Socialism sucks, ladies and gentlemen, and so do socialists. They will destroy you. They will destroy this nation. Senator Leonard then succinctly described the problem and solution by stating, quote, "It is impossible to support school-to-career reforms if those implementing the changes are motivated by social engineering. It does not matter whether the engineers are Nazis or kindergarten teachers." And more often than not, the two are the same. The idea that a government bureaucracy can better determine the direction of your child's life than the parents is frightening. Makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck and a chill go down my spine to think that they could ever get their grimy hands on my little children. They never will, because I homeschool. And if they ever challenge that, I have the Supreme Court decision that says the business of educating the children is the responsibility and the right of the parents. It is Big Brother, ladies and gentlemen. Big Brother. Big Brother. Big Brother. Big Brother. You ever see that gorilla in the movies, standing up, huge, beating his chest, King Kong? That's Big Brother. It is Big Brother, and it is being funded by your tax dollars right now. Schools ought to teach all students, first, more important than anything else in this entire world, how to read. Because if a child does not learn how to read, anything else you may teach them will come to absolutely nothing in this modern world. First, reading. First, primary, of utmost, number one importance over anything else whatsoever. Reading. Reading. Next is how to write. Write. And then how to calculate, do mathematics, and then analyze and think originally through problems. With these skills, ladies and gentlemen, and foundational knowledge, students will be prepared to enter any occupation or career they choose. And if you teach them the correct and proper, the real history of the world and of this country, they will be prepared to maintain their freedom and to make sure that it is never taken from them. To predetermine their occupational skill or career paths is wrong. It's dangerous, and it's ugly. Very, very ugly. But there are people in your school, wherever you live, who are doing their very best to implement these plans. And every time you see someone engaged in that, if you check their credentials, you'll find that they belong to the National Education Socialist. National Education Association. Socialist. Marxist socialist from beginning all the way down the line, all the way through history. And I can back that up with their own words, their own writings, their own pamphlets, their own training programs, their own books. The state of North Dakota has been involved in the federal School to Work program for 3 years. And its labor commissioner, Craig Hagan, has resigned from that state's School to Work management team after serving on it from its creation 3 years ago. Why did he resign? Because he couldn't accept what the federal government was forcing his state to do with school to work. He asked, quote, "Are we preparing children to live as whole human beings or just employees? When did the schoolhouse become the job training center of America?" End quote. In June 1996, Oklahoma's elected labor commissioner, Brenda Renow, advised Governor Frank Keating that Oklahoma should not accept federal school-to-work monies. She wrote in the Daily Oklahoman, September 19, 1996, quote, "School-to-work teachers now spend less time on academics as students spend more time outside the classroom getting real-world learning experiences." And at least one Oklahoma school-to-work document specifically states that those more traditional teachers who prove reluctant to go along with the new order will need to find new work. The whole concept of a planned labor force being created through legislative fiat is absurd. But those who have read Goals 2000 and the School to Work Opportunities Act know the game plan is very real, end quote. Another Oklahoman speaking out against school to work is Tony Maggio, a former senior vice president and corporate chief technical officer of Seagate Technology, and a former vice president to engineering for Control Data Corporation. In a recent article on school to work, Maggio wrote, quote, "Why should businessmen glibly sign on to a radical education approach when asked to join a school to work partnership?" End quote. He then suggests, quote, "Questioning those who ask for your support for a new radical education program. What actual evidence exists to indicate the new change will work better than the prior systems and methods that worked before? Show me the prototype results. Will the changes be carefully introduced into selected environments and results monitored, or will they be implemented system-wide across the board and hope for the best?" End quote. To not ask such critical questions, he suggests, quote, "is to act irresponsibly and to have business abrogate its social obligations, deny its competitive heritage, and become an active partner in the continued demise of our education system," end quote. Tony Maggio's article is being distributed by the Oklahoma Council on Public Affairs. You can contact Brandon Ducher at the OCPA at this number, 405-843-9212. That's 405-843-9212. That's in Oklahoma City. School to work. School to work, ladies and gentlemen, will involve the total restructuring and nationalization of American education, whereby schools are turned into job training centers so that Americans can compete in the global economy of an interdependent world. Remember what I've been telling you? Some of you think I'm nuts. Well, I'm not nuts, folks. If you live during the next 20 years, you're going to see it all come to pass right before your eyes. You will watch the enslavement of America. If you love your children, is that the future that you're going to give them? The internationalization of American education, if all of this is successful, will, of course, soon follow. It must follow, because the goal is a totalitarian, socialist, one-world government. In a February 24, 1997 address to the American Council on Education, United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan stated, quote, "If the United Nations is responsible for contributing to the promotion of education, I submit that educators, too, have certain responsibilities toward the United Nations. Through education, we can cultivate a citizenry prepared to thrive in the knowledge-based, interdependent society of the future. National security and national interests can no longer be thought of in narrowing terms. We have long since passed the point at which a leader, politician, or business person can afford to think in only local terms or assume that there is only one way of doing things. As the world stands poised at the dawn of a new millennium, the United Nations has an indispensable, unique moral authority in world affairs. End quote. You can find that verbatim in the United Nations Chronicle, issue number 1, 1997. If you are not careful, school to work and outcome-based educational programs will pave the way toward an ominous, techno-feudal world of the future, where your children are slaves, stuck in a slot forever from which there is no escape, in a new world, totalitarian, socialist, utopian order. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Never in human history has so few taken so much from so many as America's Illuminati and their warlords of Wall Street and Washington. In just 8 years, these banksters and international government gangsters took us from the greatest creditor nation to the largest debtor nation on earth. Our standard of living has dropped like a rock for 4 out of every 5 Americans. They have foreclosed on our homes, our farms, our factories. They've exported your jobs and surrendered our arms. They want it more.
It takes a village indeed. Well, we're going to go on a new subject now, and I don't know if I'll finish today. I probably won't, and if not, we'll finish it tomorrow. But I want you to know, folks, you can find this on our webpage at harvest-trust.org. The draconian, unconstitutional measures mandated by the Federal Aviation Administration, which are described in this broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, were the result of people such as Congressman Schumer, Democrat, New York, screaming, yelling at the top of his lungs that it was Nazi militiamen that bombed TWA Flight 800. Security measures put into place in our airports as a result of his and others like him hysteria and hatred of patriots and militia by people like Representative Schumer are still in place, even though the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the National Transportation Safety Board has stated unequivocally that no crime was committed and no bomb was involved. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, a mechanical malfunction caused the crash of TWA Flight 800. Whether it did or not is not the subject of this broadcast, and we will be doing several broadcasts on TWA Flight 800 in the future. We've already done quite a few in the past. It's a subject that needs to be discussed much more. The only Nazi that reared his ugly head was Congressman Schumer and the rest of his ilk that forced their Hitlerian restrictions upon the American people. Our right to travel, ladies and gentlemen, has been irrevocably compromised. We have lost some of our constitutionally protected Creator-endowed natural rights. We are discriminated against if we insist upon our rights with the scarlet letter-like orange sticker placed upon our tickets and baggage, or we are banned from flying. If you just drive into an airport, your car can be searched, ladies and gentlemen, whether they have probable cause or not, against the Constitution, against the protected rights that you have, and nobody's saying a word about it. In the last 2 years, everyone flying on a commercial airline has stepped up to an airline's ticket counter and heard the agent recite a familiar litany. The monologue goes something like this. Has your bag been unattended? Have you accepted gifts from a stranger? Can I see your identification, please? The traveler, already now brainwashed for many years by the big eye in his living room, docilely murmurs answers and produces a driver's license or some equivalent. As a die-hard constitutionalist, I believe that we still have an absolute, unfettered, God-given right to travel from point A to point B without permission from the state, in the air as well as on land. The old "your papers, please" routine is a Nazi Gestapo enslavement tactic that it seems Americans have forgotten about. This Nazi procedure of "your papers, please" has never been appropriate for our country, and it never will be. I have had occasion to travel a good deal in the last several months, and on those trips I decided to research and test this issue about the necessity for producing identification. I've talked with agents and their supervisors of several major airlines in cities across America and have gradually pieced together a rather complete picture of the real legal situation regarding our right to travel. By the way, folks, I did not write this. This was written under the pseudonym of Betsy Ross, but it's all true. We've checked every single bit of it out. Next, I tested this finding with several airlines. When asked for identification, I produced only my Sam's Club card, or my travel agent's ID card, or a Costco card. These are all picture IDs, but they are privately issued and do not even have a signature upon them. The airline agents just freaked out and demanded to see some state-issued ID. They routinely told me that, quote, it was federal law, end quote, a blatant lie. The government absolutely required me to cough up an official ID card, without which the agent couldn't even think of letting me on this plane. I told the agents that I could not find any federal regulation mandating that type of identification, and then asked them to cure my ignorance and please cite the regulation. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, we have also checked that there is no such regulation. But now, at this point, individual airline agents have reacted differently. Some called in their supervisor. Those are the wise ones. Alaska Air employees were the most gracious. Northwest agents were the worst. They were rude, belligerent, and hostile brats. So we recommend you don't fly Northwest Airlines. But they all folded every single time when challenged. Every single one of them folded. A particularly nasty Northwest employee marched me all the way back to the electronic detection equipment, made me pass through it a second time, and had the guard thoroughly search my carry-on bag. The same airline agent from hell actually made rude and demeaning remarks to me as we trudged back to the counter, and then she let me on the plane. Alaska Air was much more reasonable. The agent just issued my seat pass and commented that some people seem tenaciously to hold the thought that they have the right to travel without producing government ID, to which I responded, yes, amazing, isn't it? And I'm one of them. In Seattle, an agent said, as he handed me my ticket, you know, if you don't show me any government-issued ID, I can't let you board the plane. I replied, yes, I understand, but I didn't, and you are. With a smile, he just said, have a nice trip. So I have flown several times using only my meager privately issued picture ID cards. We recommend that every citizen refuse to show identification. No matter what you have to go through, they will fold because there is no such law. And there is no such right of government to forbid you to travel unless they have probable cause, ladies and gentlemen, based upon sworn testimony and a signed affidavit. Every time I use this strategy, I notice that the agent put an orange sticker on my checked bags and also on my seat pass on the ticket. Several agents divulged that this is the policy they are supposed to follow when a person does not show government ID. The bags simply wait in the baggage room until the person presents the matching seat pass as he or she actually boards the plane. Then the bags go on board. On my next trip, I decided to push the envelope even further. When the Alaska Air agent made the usual perfunctory request for identification, I put on my best face, smiled sweetly, and said, "Gee, I'm so sorry, but I just don't have any ID I could show you." To my speechless astonishment, the agent just said, "No problem. Just fill out this simple form and present it to the counter at the airplane gate." I watched as the familiar orange sticker again went on my bag. I repeated the same scenario with Horizon Air on another trip. I have now flown twice without producing any identification whatsoever. Northwest was actually instrumental in advancing my education about this issue. I was so aggravated by the insolent and hostile treatment that their employee gave me, hopefully former employee, after the blistering letter I sent to the company president, that I demanded to see a supervisor on the spot. I then demanded that he produce the relevant federal regulation right now or face personal liability for authorizing an unreasonable search and seizure, dereliction of duty, fraud, conspiracy, civil rights deprivation, and any other legal buzzwords I could think of at that moment which would justify a lawsuit against him personally as well as his employer. Like everyone else, he could not show me any statute or regulations. He even admitted that there are none. However, he did produce a copy of Security Directive 96-05, which the Federal Aviation Agency issued to all airlines in August of 1996. Its wording is very instructive, and it reads as follows. 1. Identify the passenger. Capital A. All passengers who appear to be 18 years of age will present a government-issued picture ID or two other forms of ID, at least one of which must be issued by a government authority. Capital B. The agent must reconcile the name on the ID and the name on the ticket, except as noted below. Now, pay attention to that, except as noted below. You see, they know they can't make you do anything, that there is no law that can demand it. And they know they can't make a law that would demand it because it's unconstitutional. You see, you cannot restrict the right of American citizens to travel. Remember, except as noted below, capital C. If the passenger cannot produce identification or it cannot be reconciled to match the ticket, the passenger becomes a, quote, selectee, end quote. Clear all of their luggage as noted in Section 6 below. Clear selectees checked and carry-on luggage and suspicious articles discovered by the questions asked. A. If the selectee is on a flight within the 48 continental United States or to Mexico or to Canada, items can be cleared by either of the following methods. 1. Empty the luggage or item and physically search its contents by a qualified screener. Remember the actions taken by Northwest. Or 2. Bag match. Ensure the bag is not transported on the aircraft if the passenger does not board. Remember all those orange stickers, folks? Capital B. If the selectee is on an international flight, checked luggage, carry-on luggage, and suspect items can be cleared only by the following method. Empty the luggage or item and physically search its contents by qualified screeners. That's it. This document apparently goes on for 10 more pages. But in the 10 more pages, ladies and gentlemen, it does not give them any more authority than what I have just quoted to you now. The Northwest supervisor gave me only the first page, which contains the information that I just read to you. The next time I refused to produce ID and the agent freaked, I told her, quote, just tap up Security Decision 96-5 on your computer and go to paragraph 1, section capital C. Designate me as a selectee and proceed accordingly. She apparently thought I was an FAA undercover employee because she said that she was tired of you federal guys coming around and literally spying on airline agents, coercing us into lying to people and essentially being the bagman for an activity which has no legal requirement. I told her that I could not agree more. Another airline employee later confirmed that FAA agents often engage in such entrapment activities to make sure that airline agents parrot the government party line about state-issued ID. I also hit pay dirt in a discussion with another, much nicer Northwest agent on the East Coast. In a candid conversation, he told me that FAA personnel had held training sessions with all airline agents in the fall of 1996. Agents were informed directly by the FAA that they absolutely could not bar an American citizen from boarding a plane, even if a passenger refused to produce any identification at all. You see, they know the law, and they know what the Constitution says. But as long as they can scare you and lie to you and manipulate you into conforming to the new police state, you can bet your butt they're going to do it. I understand Delta Airline is facing 2 large lawsuits because employees twice denied this reality and actually twice kept off a plane a passenger who had only private ID to show. Now, if you'd like to own an airline, courtesy of a judge, just keep flying until somebody says you can't board the plane and then go down and get yourself a top-notch lawyer. I have personally flown Delta with only a private travel card, so I guess they already had their hands slapped. Yet another agent in the Midwest admitted that airline personnel were deliberately and knowingly coercing people into showing government ID by saying, quote, it's the law, end quote, when they know for a fact that it is not, and there is no law. According to him, the reality is that the companies are simply tired of people selling their frequent flyer tickets. The airlines wanted to stem this practice by checking everyone's ID, but knew there would be big problems if they instituted this procedure as a private corporate policy. Now that's just an excuse, folks. That is not the truth. The government used the crash of TWA Flight 800 and the hysteria created by people like Representative Schumer and others to get the public to allow them to take away yet more of your constitutionally protected creator-endowed rights. That is the truth. It was so much more convenient, they claim, to say it was federal law and make the government the scapegoat. So this policy meets the airline's private financial goals and the government's goal of every increasing social control. And that's the real purpose. Socialism requires total and complete control over your lives from birth until death. If you don't complain, if you don't assert your rights, if every time some little petty, stinking, Hitlerian bureaucrat demands that you do something and says it's the law, every time that you don't demand that they produce that law, you're going to end up a lot quicker than you think as a slave in this socialist New World Order. If no one complains or asserts their rights regarding travel, then another freedom is, poof, presto magico, gone. Of course, our children are watching this happen, and they grow up thinking that the state has both the right to define our identity by issuing documents saying who we are, and also the right to require us to produce them on demand. And it's not true. Of course, television wouldn't have anything to do with that, would it? Every time I watch television, I see shows depicting federal agents, police officers, bureaucrats, real estate agents, and every other little frustrated, insecure Hitler demanding that people conform to laws that don't exist. And of course, on television, they all do it, thus teaching our children, and of course, all of the adult sheeple of the nation, that that's the way it's supposed to be, when in reality, it's not supposed to be that way at all in this country. I told you not long ago, in fact, I told you a few years ago, a woman who was a young girl during the years that Hitler was coming to power called me, said she was growing increasingly concerned. She and her parents managed to escape Nazi Germany. She was becoming increasingly concerned because she could see the same programs, the same mannerisms, the same police state being implemented right here in the United States of America, where she thought she was going to live out her life, and her children could live out their life, and her grandchildren could live out their lives, and her great-grandchildren could live out their lives in liberty and freedom. Created equal, endowed with certain unalienable Creator-endowed natural rights. You've got a lot to think about tonight, folks, don't you? And I hope you think real hard about it. If you have a friend who's a socialist, apply the old social magic that used to work in the old days. Anyone who is not an American, who is going about the business of destroying this country from within, socially shun them. And tell them the reason why. Doesn't mean you have to curse at them. Doesn't mean you have to hit them or hurt them or do damage to their property. Just stop speaking to them forever. Don't invite them to your home. Don't have anything to do with them whatsoever. Don't do business with them. They'll get the message after a while. But you know what? I don't know if Americans still know how to do that kind of thing anymore. But they better learn. They better relearn. They better start applying it. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. And God bless each and every single one of you, even the socialists. Remember, God has a huge bucket that is infinite in its mercy.